The unbearable heat was not unusual for the last days of summer, yet folks seemed to think that September should bring relief instead of more of the same hot, dry, dusty conditions that made merely existing seem like a chore for the most hardy of men. Not even a cool drink of water under the shade of a low-hanging roofline could provide respite for a perspiring pedestrian or diminish the hot rays of the ball of fire slowly slipping toward the western horizon. For this reason, the streets of Tombstone were unnaturally quiet. While ladies endeavored to relax in their homes or on their covered porches, most men took to the saloons where it was believed that a game of cards or a drink of whiskey might help get their minds off the heat and their boredom. For a young man out to prove himself, a saloon was the perfect place to look for a fight. For a more content man who had no need to prove his worth, the porch of the sheriff's office was the perfect place to gab the day away. But for Gage Colton, those quiet and dusty streets of Tombstone were a source of information on that lazy day in mid-September. After his father's untimely death, he had made the necessary arrangements as best he could, kissed his daughter, and left the Colton ranch to try to find the man who was responsible for the aching grief that plagued his very waking thought and even his dreams. To a casual observer, Jeb's murder had appeared to be an accident at best, or at worst, a suicide. However, Gage was no casual observer. He was a man who had seen his fair share of death by gunshot, and this was definitely a murder. It had seemed like hours, but only a few moments had passed between the echo of a gunshot and his riding up to find his father lying prone on the ground, revolver in his right hand with a widening stain of crimson darkening his shirt front. He had quickly dismounted and went to his father's side, calling out to him, but even before Jeb spoke in a labored whisper, Gage knew it was too late. "I don't think I ever seen him before." "Did you get a good look at him?" he had asked, wishing for something to do. "Sure did," Jeb had gasped, trying to suck in enough air. "He was Indian, I think." Then with a final sigh, he whispered so soft that Gage almost missed it. "Just a kid." The next couple of days had seemed to fly by with so much activity that nothing really made sense except his father's last words and the knowledge that an Indian kid was out there, running from a crime that he had tried to cover up by making it look like another's. Memorizing the prints made by the killer's horse, Gage said his goodbyes and left. The Colton ranch lay near the Rio Grande, and due to the hard work of panning for gold in California was something of which to be proud of. But shouldering the responsibility of managing such a large spread would just have to wait. The deceased rancher's eldest son was not certain why he left to follow the trail of the fast gun that had ended his father's life, but trail him he did. Years ago he might have been on the gunman's trail so as to silence the kid forever, but not anymore. He was now a Christian, and even though he was not quite sure what he would do when he found his father's killer, he knew he was not bringing harm to the man. He had been in nearly every town since San Antonio, and the information he had gathered so far was not much to go on. Besides killing Jeb Colton, the half-breed gunman was reported to have killed 2 card cheats down in Mexico and a bartender in San Antone, and rumor was that the kid was very fast and deadly accurate. Speculation was that the kid was still looking for someone, but as for whom, well, no one seemed to know. When he had asked around, folks had differing opinions on the kid's appearance. Some said he was over 6 feet tall with long hair and a beard. Some thought he was little and scrawny with greasy hair and an ill-kept appearance. Mostly, however, no one really knew what the man looked like. They all said he was a young Indian brave who either never spoke or had little to say for himself. And now, after being in Tombstone for nearly 2 days, no one seemed to have any more ideas as to the kid's whereabouts than he did. However, he was no less determined than when he had started out on the quest down in Texas. Figuring it was time to move on, he had just decided to go back to his hotel to pack his saddlebags when he overheard a conversation between 2 men that attracted his immediate attention. "Hey, Harry," one of the men asked, "what was ye thinking about calling that kid out like that? I mean, seeing as how he ain't done nothing to ye, reckon ye ain't got no reason to kill him." "No reason to kill him," the other man exclaimed in outrage. "Why, I reckon his being an Injun what thinks he's gooder than us white folks is good enough reason, Bob. I'm going to kill him tomorrow. Just you wait and see. But I heard he's a real fast gun and don't never miss what he aims at. What if—" and Harry did not allow his brother to finish. "How bad can it be, Bob? I mean, come on. He's just a kid and a half-breed at that. I'll have him dead before you can blink an eye. Now, are we going to get inside out of this heat and play a game of cards or stand out here and chit-chat all afternoon?" In an instant, Gage recognized the twosome standing in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Both men had showed up at a time in his life that he did not care to remember. He had hoped never to lay eyes on them again, and seeing the pair so soon after his own father's death, he felt a cold lump of dread settle in his gut. He did not know why the Baker brothers were so far south, but he could not help but think that trouble would be the end result. Knowing both men as he did, he knew they had spent most of the last 3 years in either Colorado or Wyoming, and now he wondered if they were speaking of the very man who had seemed to elude him for the past several weeks. Praying he would not be recognized, he approached the two men and inquired, "Don't mean to interrupt you, gentlemen, but what might be the name of this kid?" Harry frowned at the man who stood a good 4 inches above him. "What's it to you, stranger?" he asked. He wasn't sure he liked strangers listening in on his private conversation. "Just curious," Gage said with a lazy calm that he did not feel. Harry's frown deepened. He had not said 10 words to this tall stranger, yet he disliked him already. "The kid ain't been bothering ye too, has he?" he pried. Fixing his gaze upon the smaller man with a determined look in his clear blue eyes, Gage prompted, "The kid's name?" "The breed never said what his name was," Bob said quickly before Harry could open his big mouth and possibly get them into more trouble than necessary. "Folks just calls him the breed." "Why is that?" Gage asked, not taking his eyes away from Harry's oily countenance. "'Cause he looks like a half-breed," Harry answered incredulously, wondering if the tall man was possibly a few cards short of a full deck. "And," Gage concluded, "you're going to kill him tomorrow?" "Yep, sure am. Come high noon tomorrow, he'll meet me right here in front of the Silver Dollar, and I'm going to kill him dead," Harry bragged, growing more self-confident as the questioning leaned toward him and not the breed. "Well, I reckon I'll be moving along," was all Gage said as he continued his stroll down the rough board sidewalk. Something just did not seem right about the situation, and, feeling that cold lump of dread grow larger, he intended to figure it out before moving on. Perhaps this was the break for which he had been searching. As the man left, Harry and Bob looked at one another in puzzlement. Turning toward the double doors of the saloon, Harry asked, "What you suppose that stranger be a-wantin' to know about the breed fur?" "Why, that warn't no stranger," Bob said, glancing over his shoulder at the retreating form. "That was Gage Colton, you know, the gunfighter we met up with back in '76. A thoughtful look came over Harry's face. As he sat down at one of the scarred card tables, he said, "So it is, Bob. Do you reckon somebody's hired him to get that breed?" "Wouldn't know," said Bob, "but I can tell you one thing. If Colton's after that kid, then I kind of feel sorry for him. Colton's got good with that gun, and he always was a meanin'. Fact is, I was a-getting kind of worried a minute ago 'cause you wouldn't shut of ye mouth. What if'n you'd made Colton mad? Don't know about you sometimes, Harry." "Know what you mean about Colton being a meanin'," Harry agreed. Shuffling a deck of cards, he finished, "I 'member how he never showed no mercy to those he went after, but you'd nothing to worry about. I could have took care of that kid and Colton too with one hand tied behind my back." As the noon hour of the next day drew near, the street in front of the Silver Dollar began to empty. But it was not due to a lack of curiosity. In fact, those souls who were brave enough were finding vantage points along the street in order to watch from a distance. They were hungry for something new to gossip about, but they were not stupid. No one wanted to get in the way of a stray bullet. Among those brave souls, standing just inside an alley across from the saloon, stood Gage Colton. The last thing he wanted to see was bloodshed, but he felt he needed to see who this kid really was. Something in him seemed to be shouting that he was right. He was finally going to get a look at the one he'd been following since Texas. Trouble was, what would he do if his instincts were correct?